Guys, a long time ago, I almost died. You see, in the day one Valve the Disciple raid, the hours dragged on, but we were gaming. And in that moment, I thought I was gonna starve. But the light bestowed upon me a blessing that day that has been with me ever since. And that was the mythical factor meal. Fellas, these chef-prepared, 2-minute made ready meals that can deliver right to your doorstep is what can keep you in the fight hour after hour. From pork chops to steak and shrimp to homemade delicious pasta, Factor has it all. And when you really break down the numbers, you save more money eating from Factor than you would from any fast food chain. All of these meals are catered and customized to your diet preferences. You're a vegetarian? All right, we've got a number of meals for that. You're on keto? No problem. And if you're like me, I just like to cycle between all the different options every few months just to mix that palate up a bit. Fellas, if you're interested in trying out these amazing meals, head on over to factor75.com, or you can click our link down below and use code Aztecross50 to get 50% off on your first Factor box. And get this, you get free wellness shots for life. That's 2 free wellness shots from 3 available flavors for every order while you're an active subscriber. That is a hell of a deal, guys. Again, code Aztecross50 for 50% off and free wellness shots forever. Guys, if you want to watch an amazing stream with some incredible individuals, please check out the firing range. We got Fallout, Kamikaze, Drewski, with weapon designer Mercules joining them this past week. Again, link to that will be in the description and in the pinned comment down below. Today's video, though, is going to be a breakdown of the most recent episode on firing range. This is going to be a long one, fellas. I've got 10 pages worth of notes, so let's dive in. Question number 1. I thought Bungie said they wouldn't make Checkmate the default PvP experience when it first entered labs, but we're now getting a special ammo economy like Checkmate paired with ability cooldown nerfs. Are these more daunting on paper than in practice? From Mercules here. It is not our intention to make the original Checkmate mode into the core PvP experience, but we are experimenting with the current iteration of Checkmate to gather data, lessons, and feedback that we can use to eventually tune the base PvP sandbox. He goes on to say that the original Checkmate feels substantially different from the tuning coming on March the 5th, but there are some similarities. These changes aren't designed to be such wide swings to where the game feels unfamiliar, as in they're not trying to remove abilities, as that would be a feature in the new game mode hardware. Now, Fallout asks how the mode feels. Mercules says he really likes it. He's been playtesting it for a long time, and he says the team made good changes for the overall health of the game. And despite not having these wide swings to the overall core PvP, these are still the biggest sweeping changes that has happened to PvP since Forsaken. I know you're probably like, Cross, we haven't had any PvP changes since Forsaken. Okay, fair enough. But Merc goes on to say that they feel confident that they can quickly correct any changes necessary if certain things are too hot or just feel bad in the live game. Next question. How are the perks like Overflow, Shoot to Loot, Disaster Plan, Spark of Momentum, and others going to work in the new special ammo economy? Answer. Bungie is not finished iterating on special ammo changes and will continue to make changes based on feedback. They also brought up that they'll be trying out the special ammo crate system as well here. And when they test out those ammo crates, Guardians will drop special ammo bricks to trigger those perks. And if they were to get rid of ammo bricks completely, they may go in to change those perks as needed. Now, he goes on to say that this is not guaranteed that these perks will work in PvE and PvP, which is going to require them to kind of individually tune here. On top of that, some things have really high uptime in PvE, and then inside of PvP, they don't work at all. I think what's really being said here more than anything, guys, before we start talking about perks and fragments and making big changes to these things, we need to just see how the ammo economy is going to work. People may really love Checkmate system, and they may absolutely loathe things like special ammo bricks in their featured game modes. So what I get from this is more like, let's just wait and see. Next question. What's the design philosophy of SMGs versus ARs? Bungie has said in the past they don't want another AR meta, but have allowed an SMG meta. Now, Merc says the difference is ARs have significantly more range, and most of them kill just as fast. They also have shallow damage and aim assist fall off. Now, he goes on to say that high impact auto rifles are actually being slept on, as they have really high range and actually only being outranged by things like pulse rifles or scouts. Now, the real reason they don't want an AR meta is because they can be used in a much wider area compared to SMGs. Merc says that ARs are also the hard meta at lower skill levels. In order to be meta on the highest level, they would need to kill faster, which if ARs became the meta at the highest levels, nothing below that would even matter. Now, I'm going to mention something on this too. We have had 2 memorable auto rifle metas. Number 1 was Uriel's gift in year 1 of Destiny 2. Uriel's was really good, but let me be real. The 600 round per minute auto rifle meta, especially when hard light was at its peak, that was the most defining auto rifle meta that I can think of. And I remember at the time, the concern that Bungie made was because the barrier there to be good with an auto rifle was so low, and the range of which it was so deadly, auto rifles dominated the meta. And everything from Gnawing Hunger, Hard Light, and any other 600 round per minute auto rifle at that time was extremely potent. Now, Merc goes on to say, and I quote, "This is hard to believe, but SMGs do have a little bit of a skill curve," and says for lower skill players, they are the least effective weapon at those players, with the main reason being they are range capped to a certain extent, and there are a lot of other things within 20 meters that can kill just as fast. So for low skill players who don't have fast reaction time and don't have good positioning, they can't use SMGs well and are better off using other weapons. Now, Merc says he went back and checked, and they have nerfed SMGs directly 8 times and indirectly 5 times since season 19. And in Lightfall, SMGs peaked at 33% of kills and are now sitting at 14%. Now, he goes on to say that they know that SMGs can still be frustrating in the right hands, and that is why they are nerfing target lock. Again, guys, target lock is going to be pretty much useless in PvP after next week. They're also decreasing body shot damage, and they're not increasing the crit damage as much as other weapons. Now, I want to mention something before everyone nuts up on that quote of Merc's. He's probably speaking also from a perspective of someone who's been playing with SMGs in its nerf state, most notably in the Crucible sandbox that we're going to be experimenting with next week. Then they go on to discuss that Bungie has previously nerfed all SMG range. They've also nerfed lightweights, nerfed Icolos, nerfed aggressives, nerfed immortal, nerfed stability on SMGs globally, and they're nerfing damage next week. The range zoom changes indirectly nerfed SMGs. We also got the Peacekeeper changes, and then nerfed the target lock 3 times, with the most recent one coming next week being a direct nerf to target lock on SMGs. Now, he goes on to say that across all players, SMGs aren't very effective anymore. Only really high skill players, with most usage being on Titans, which is why Peacekeepers were nerfed, and they've seen usage drop due to that. Now, he believes the PvP changes with the nerf to SMGs and more special ammo for things like shotguns and fusions will keep SMGs in check. But he does mention that they are still super hot, and they will be tuned again if needed. Now, Drusiki asked for clarifications between the attribute differences between ARs and SMGs. Merc answers by saying that ARs are generally slower firing besides both having 600s and 720s. ARs have bigger magazines, higher zoom. Damage profile for range and Amos's Falloff, because it's a shoulder weapon, is also significantly lower. Merc went on to explain that weapons like autos, pulses, scouts, all the rifle weapons are considered shoulder weapons. And then we have handhelds like sidearms, SMGs, and hand cannons, which have sharper range in Amos's Falloff. For example, an SMG may start to experience damage falloff around 20 meters, but then at like 27 meters, it's basically completely useless. Whereas an auto rifle will start to experience damage falloff at 35 meters, but won't fully fall off until 50 meters. Now, I do want to mention this is just an example. This is not every auto rifle in the game. But the point is, the drop off is much further away. The slope is not nearly as steep. Now, the next question. Some players have expressed concerns that the upcoming sandbox changes will lead to team shot and death balling, similar to the meta in year 1 of Destiny 2. What lessons were learned from previous sandbox to address this? And what options do players have to contest this playstyle? Mercules says that these changes are closer to Forsaken era sandbox, not D2 year 1. Year 1 has slower optimal time to kill, with no special ammo, only heavy, slower movement, less abilities, and also less lethal abilities. He says even with these changes, we are a far cry away from D2 year 1. He says that high skill players should still have a lot of tools at their disposal, used to break up team shotting and death balling. But he goes on to mention that team shooting even right now is strong, and doesn't know if it will necessarily increase, but should have enough tools to counter it still, especially high skill players. I will say, guys, even though I hate getting killed by Cloud Strike, especially when my teammate peeks their head, if there is one weapon that's like the anti-death balling weapon, it's Cloud Strike. Now, speaking on next week's sandbox, he says that high skill players will notice a change in their engagements, especially if they can land their shots and their opponents cannot, or specifically their crits. Again, the health pool being increased next week is going to result in everyone having to land their crits if you're looking to reach that optimal time to kill. Now, he goes on to say that this is not the final stop for PvP. They can also make future changes based on feedback. Next question. Based on changes to more primary focused gameplay, do they think hybrid weapons like Vex Mythoclast, Revision 0, and Hawkmoon will see increased usage? Mark goes on to say that he thinks they will, but they do have some built-in skill checks in order to take advantage of their exotic perks, especially things that need kills and hits like Vex and Hawkmoon versus weapons like Wishender and Devil's Ruin, which they are already addressing. Now, Fallout mentions since players don't lean into weapons as much with kill requirements, they will never get to know the joy of cryosthesia. Mark goes on to say, you better hope people don't learn the joy of it. Cryo is nasty, no lie. You pretty much can't do anything, especially in a 1v1 once cryosthesia gets going. Now, in my opinion, I think Vex Mythoclast won't be back to its former glory until it is a 390 again. That's been the thing that has single-handedly hurt it the most. Now, granted, they are increasing the range next week to Vex Mythoclast, so yes, it is getting a direct buff. So we'll see how much that actually picks it up. But for weapons like Hawkmoon, I think in a primary environment, Hawkmoon is fantastic. You start stacking those crits, you will eat people with that weapon. Now, with all that being said, we are going to be doing pre and post testing on Hawkmoon just to kind of see where damage looks for Paracausal and its stacks. Can you get the 1 crit, 1 body at 5 stacks of Paracausal? Again, we're gonna have to just test this and see. We'll have an entire video pre and post next week. Next question. How does Bungie feel about DMT in its current state, especially on console? And most notably, how do they feel about 120 aggressive scouts as an archetype? And it was expressed that the hipfire kind of sucks, especially on those legendaries. Now, Merc says that DMT is going to be buffed a bit in the final shape. They're going to be increasing its hipfire rate from 130 back to 140. They're also increasing magnetism fall-off scale, which affects controllers. So a big buff there. Now, they're removing the PvE only damage buff, and in PvP, you will get a 15% damage buff at max stacks of Cranial Spike. He also goes on to say that it will grant stability in addition to aim assist. Now, he goes on to say that in order to keep it from getting too out of hand, they're reducing the accuracy benefits slightly, but that only comes into play at extremely long ranges. TLDR, guys, DMT sounds like it's going to be back. Now, Fallout had a great thing to say about DMT, though, is that it walks this fine line between being both insane and simultaneously just sitting in his vault, and that it's a horrifying weapon in PvP. And he's right. DMT went from being like the most used weapon to everybody throwing that thing in the vault. But for the final shape, guys, Dead Man's Tale is getting a buff. Now, Merc goes on to talk about 120s, and he says that they are going to be feeling a whole lot better with the text balance stock origin trait getting a buff. By the way, that buff comes out next week in the March update. He then goes on to say that the Trials 120 Scout that is coming out is a stat monster. It also has hipfire grip in one slot with offhand strike in another. Now, for my people that never use offhand strike, keep in mind this is a perk that buffs your range, stability, and accuracy when you get a final blow for your hipfire shots only. It is a fantastic perk for fusion rifles. You've probably seen clips from LEGO who has shown the kill potential of offhand strike. And because of the crit damage increases that are going to be hitting scout rifles next week, 120s in particular are going to be able to 2-crit 1 body all resilience levels, something 120 hand cannons next week won't be able to do, considering they're getting their body shot damage reduced. Now, guys, I'm not going to jump up and say we're going to be in a 120 scout rifle meta, but considering the buff that's coming to text balance stock and 120s directly, I would definitely be looking in your vault and just check if you've got a God Roll long arm. And if not that, just break out DMT. Now, moving on to the next question. In the new system next week, even a bit of damage drop-off will result in a 140 round per minute hand cannon will require 4 shots to get a kill instead of 3. Is this an intentional nerf? Merc goes on to say that yes, this is intentional. Almost all weapons are affected by seeing forgiveness shifts. He goes on to say that 140s had free reign in Checkmate when they stayed the same and everything else was nerfed. And they took their damage down, which puts them right on the edge of still being able to hit their optimal time to kill. And because they couldn't directly affect the crit to body ratio, as this would shift time to kill, requiring 1 more shot, this would put them at a 1.3 time to kill. And says that starting next week, to use hand cannons effectively, you need to be within optimal range and you gotta hit your crits. And guys, keep in mind, they're also gonna be reducing the flinch dealt to players by projectile impact by 12.5% and by explosive payload by 10%. What I'm saying from that is that your hand cannons next week won't be flinching your opponents as much and vice versa. Now, the next question. Cammy asks about special weapons, most notably the ones that are basically primaries, things like Forerunner, Ariana's Vow. He says he feels like they are going to be hit the hardest by these special ammo changes. And what are Bungie's plans to keep them competitive? Now, Mark's answer on this is they didn't want to tune too many weapons at the same time, as they want to see how things work in the live environment. Again, like we mentioned, the changes from above, guys, that's kind of what everything boils down to. But he did go on to say that Forerunner was tuned individually. The new special ammo system allows more freedom for tuning ammo values. And he says weapons like Forerunner and Ariana, they can up the amount of ammo they receive as they lean more into that primary special weapon hybrid. Now, Cammy asks an interesting question. Could we see these weapons get credit toward our special meter like a primary? Now, if you're wondering what he's talking about, guys, again, next week, there are a number of values that will contribute to a special ammo meter. Kills, assists, hell, even deaths, and capturing objectives. Now, what does not contribute at all to your special ammo counter going up, which is what grants you special ammo, is a special weapon kill. Which is why this question Cammy asked is such a good question, as you have weapons like Ariana's and Forerunner, which is like that primary special hybrid. Now, Mark says he's not sure and that he would need to talk about it internally. It's an interesting thought though, guys. Think about it. You get special ammo for your Forerunner, you start chaining kills with Forerunner, and therefore you start feeding back into that weapon. I think that may be the only scenario in which you would actually take advantage of Forerunner's Catalyst the Rock. Outside of that, you're never going to use it unless you're in PvE. There's also brought up the topic of trace rifles. Merc says that trace rifles right now are currently slept on, and that is his favorite special to use, especially in the crate system. He says if traces are still too weak, they'll buff them again. They're already getting a 20% buff, partially due to the 15% increase increase to health, but they're getting an extra 5%. Guys, there is a reason we made a video on Cold Heart not that long ago. Cold Heart intrinsically has target lock, and despite target lock being nerfed, Cold Heart is not. So yeah, we are definitely going to be testing trace rifles next week. And the next question that came up, there's a lot of focus on reducing forgiveness of weapons. 120s, being 120 hand cannons, are taking a big hit. People are talking about perks like Precision Instrument, which will help 120s get their forgiveness back. What are your thoughts on this, Merc? And will these perks feel mandatory? Merc says that forgiveness is not needed for everyone, so don't feel that this makes a perk like Precision Instrument necessary. At the same time, they're okay with perks increasing forgiveness, as long as there is a level above where people don't feel like they need to use that perk. The example he gives is for Headseeker on pulse rifles. Yes, it's S tier, but you're good even without Headseeker, as you could still 2-burst, leaving more options for other traits. Now he goes on to say that there are always going to be people that go for consistency perks over anything else, and that's fine. Now Druzy asks what the resilience threshold is where 120s lose their forgiveness. Merc says it will be 7 resilience, where it goes to 3 crits instead of 2 crits, 1 body. Druzy then asks Merc, is he going to invest in 7 resilience or not? Merc says he will be. There you go, guys. Make sure you're rocking 7 resilience or more next week. Now Merc says overall resilience thresholds are lower now, which helps out hunters who don't typically spec into resilience as much as Titans and Warlocks. Right now, typically resilience thresholds sit around 6 or 7, but will be changing to around 3, although there are higher ones such as 120s and rapid fire autos who have that time to kill shifts at tier 10. Merc doesn't think that will lead to their usage dropping, but they can still tweak it. Now he goes on to say that he personally cares about resilience more for extra health against random things that come in gameplay, rather than worrying about time to kill breakpoints. Now Kami asks, will Precision Instruments on 120s kill overshields at tier 10 resilience? Merc says it should, but not 100% sure off the top of his head. Personally, guys, I have kept a Precision Instrument Igneous for this moment right here. It grants you increased damage with every precision hit, and in a primary only environment, especially when you start to take into account damage fall off, it may be the go-to perk. But again, that will require testing on our part. Now next question, what is the purpose of rapid fire shotguns in PvP? Is there even one? Merc says just like the perk talk earlier, with not all perks needed to be usable in both modes, the same is with rapid fire shotguns. Now he mentioned they did something interesting with ammo crates, giving a percentage of ammo based on your magazine perk. Exotics are specially tuned, so things like Cloud Strike don't get more ammo, but rapid fires will get 3 shots out of an ammo crate, where other shotguns get 2, unless you're rocking a mag or a mod to increase ammo per magazine. Now Merc says this may give them a bit of an edge, but the purpose is that they will get more ammo, but they're not as lethal. Now he goes on to clarify that this is just for ammo crates, not for the ammo meter, as that is set amounts. Now Merc says something that the new sandbox does well, and we're not going to see this in the first iteration, but it can be adjusted, is that the new system allows some forgiveness for some underperforming archetypes, and brings up things like 120 scouts that they mentioned earlier. In the previous sandbox, all weapons were already forgiving as is, and it makes sense to use a weapon just because it was forgiving, because everything was forgiving. Why use a 180 round per minute hand cannon that can 2 crit 2 body when a 120 can 2 crit in 1 body for the same optimal time to kill? In the new sandbox, there's more room to do tuning to make certain archetypes more forgiving if need be. 180s will launch doing 3 crits 1 body, but they can put it back to 2 crit 2 body, making them more forgiving. Now I will say, guys, that kind of sucks. Like, what a random nerf to 180 round per minute hand cannons, right? It's like, hey, you guys haven't been meta since Luna's Howl Not Forgotten? Take another. Now the next question, why was Wishender and Devil's Ruin nerfed in ways that seem to maintain the issue that makes them hard to play against to begin with? Why not give them kill triggers? Now Merc goes on to say that they can add kill triggers if needed, but what makes them unique as exotics is that their perks don't require kill activation, and they don't want to completely nuke them by needing that. He says they'll still be usable, but shouldn't be as frustrating. But he goes on to say that sometimes you do just need to crush things. For instance, Antaeus Wards, or special ammo linear fusions like Lawrence Driver or Arbalest. But they don't really like to do that because usage will plummet to nearly 0. Now Merc explains everyone has been upset about bows, but after the buffs, they only went from 4.5% to 5.7% in terms of primary usage. And he goes on to say they may have hit bows a bit too hard, but they can revisit later if needed. But they'll still be good, just not nearly as frustrating as they are now, as they'll be dealing less damage per shot. Now he goes on to say if they completely crush bows, they're hurting the players that really like them, and it also eliminates them as an option to those players. But he says the team has made efforts to eliminate cheesier builds, such as bow swapping, which is difficult to counter. Now I will admit it is, especially against macro users. Now the next question, have Glaives reached their peak in terms of potency after their recent rework? Would perks like Chain Reaction or even perks like Chill Clip be considered? How would they perform going forward, and are any other changes planned? Now Merc says for PvP they are about as strong as they want them to be. It says they might might be able to add perks like chain reaction in the future, because in the final shape, they are nerfing the effectiveness of chain reaction. And there it is, fellas. Everyone right now that is clutching their forbearance, say goodbye. Bungie's nerfing it. Now, this is your moment right now to recognize the impending doom, which is coming for that god roll, which is why you probably need to consider Undercurrent. I'm just saying, guys. It's got bolt shots. I know you love chain reaction. I love it too on forbearance. But depending on how bad Bungie does nerf chain reaction, Undercurrent may be the go-to wave frame, at least if you're looking for kabloomies. Now, for Chill Clip, he says they don't have a legendary stasis glaive yet, which is why we made that video about Albedo Wing. This was the Dawning Glaive. We said it was such a missed opportunity. It could have been a stasis glaive. Bungie could have gave it cold steel, which would have been amazing. I would prefer that over Chill Clip, but we'll see if they actually add that in the future. Now, the next question, will we get a hand cannon or sidearm with Cascade points? Mark says he tried it. He actually said when they were working on Malfeasance and its catalyst, the original idea was to give it Cascade point, but he goes on to say that it was unusable and too uncontrollable. Long term, it would be funny, but short term, they can't put it on as it exists currently. They would need to custom tune it. Mark says that people bring up Last Word's RPM, but it has custom tuning. And Kami actually said he had a glitch on Last Word where he would shoot wildly upwards and he couldn't control it. Dude, no lie, when Last Word first came out, I hated how it felt, at least on controller. And I think after that point is when Bungie went in there, custom tuned it, and Last Word really like jumped from the meta on both input devices. Like at one time, it was like the meta for mouse and keyboard users, but when aiming down sights. And then when it converted to its hipfire meta, it became meta for controller users. Now, with all that being said, I can't help but wonder what Malfeasance would actually be like with Cascade Point. Dude, that sounds nuts, right? Can you imagine the damage it could do with Lucky Pants? Oh, you would get those stacks so fast. Now, the next question, is the end goal to have deterministic recoil on all exotics, or at least PvP ones like Vigilance Wing? And are there any plans to retroactively put it on older weapons or only new weapons moving forward? Again, guys, deterministic recoil is a change Bungie made in Season of the Witch, where, like its name gives you, recoil that's more manageable, or in this case, deterministic. Vigilance Wing is getting an update next week with that same recoil control. Now, Merc states that they're still evaluating deterministic recoil and whether or not if they have planned to continue with it. But yes, the plan is to still slap it on future legendaries and exotics as needed. But he goes on to say that Vigilance Wing needed this change because back in the day, you used to have counterbalance armor mods, which, dude, I completely forgot about those mods. You used to be able to slap counterbalance as an armor mod, which is what made Vigilance Wing as an exotic, considering you can't put those mods on an exotic, usable. And not that you can't use Vigilance Wing now, but with the new recoil pattern, Vigilance Wing should be feeling a lot better. Now, Fallout asks if Mark can just talk about the general feeling of deterministic recoil. Mark says it has been a mixed bag. He says the goal of deterministic recoil is valid, allowing you to learn and master a weapon. At the same time, it isn't easily surfaced to players, as most stats are more number equals better, whereas recoil, that isn't always the case. And that is true when it comes to recoil direction. Now, you normally want figures that end in 5. The closer you get to 100, the better, which I know in that case is like more is better, but I would take 65 recoil direction over 80, if that makes any sense, guys. Now, the next question, any exotic weapons where catalysts have been made but not released due to the weapon being too good? Mark says, not since he has been at Bungie. He asked Chris Proctor, and he said the same thing. They have investment setups for catalysts if they do make one, which sometimes slip in the API. But in those cases, those catalysts don't actually exist. This is when Drewski brought up the myth that we have talked about for years, the Last Word catalyst, High Noon. Fallout stated that he had a viewer actually reach out to him and say that High Noon activated for him inside of PvP, allowing him to hit 160 damage per crit, but he tried to replicate it and never could. But the rundown on the Last Word catalyst, guys, at least from what Mark is saying here, it doesn't exist. My week is ruined. We've waited years for this catalyst. I think at this point, Bungie should just give it to us, considering we've been teased by the API, and I'm still wondering how it even made its way into the API, but whatever. Next question, is there a consideration of OG Checkmate and its lower time to kill being brought into the base game? They feel like over the years, time to kill has been faster and optimum time to kill has been made easier to hit. Now, Mark says that's what they were alluding to in the twit. They aren't making TTKs faster, and for the most part, weapons aren't as forgiving anymore. He goes on to say that players have played with weapons more and mastered them. Average skill of players have increased with higher percentage of players being able to hit optimal time to kills, and they are bringing Checkmate back to labs in April, which will see primary weapon time to kill tuned to be slower across the board. But no, they are not currently interested in increasing optimal time to kill in the core sandbox. Now, next big question, will the element changes to prophecy weapons be retroactive or only new ones? Answer, they will not be retroactive, as they will be completely different weapons. So guys, on that front, and again, we have elemental changes hitting these prophecy weapons. Yeah, you can farm it this week if you want. Those elements which are changing on the current rolls that are dropping or the rolls that are sitting in your vaults will remain the same. Now, personally, I'm gunning for the new rolls, but that's just me. Next question, is there any need for airborne effectiveness to remain remain in the game? Has it been more damaging than helpful to the sandbox? And could this be reconsidered with airplay from Strand not being as prominent as expected? Now, Merc explains that AE has always existed in some form. Prior to Forsaken, it could not be increased. In Forsaken, they introduced Icarus Grip and Heat Rises, but due to only having 2 options to actually increase this, there was a need for an in-game stat. Now, currently with AE, if they were to remove that system, that would reduce accuracy by around 300%, and it would be most noticeable on exotic weapons. Now, with that being said, Merc goes on to say that he hears the concern about AE. He says the real issue is the lack of aim assist when in the air, as when you're in the air, aim assist gets cut down by 75%. 0 AE, you have half the aim assist than before the AE system was introduced, and 100 AE is 110% more. Now, the final shape will introduce helmet mods that stack and gives you plus 15 AE for 1, and plus 25 AE for 2, and plus 30 for 3. So guys, we're gonna finally have a way to build into that AE stat for the first time in a meaningful way. Now, Merc goes on to explain Airborne effectiveness a little more, and he uses Rose as an example. A base Rose with nothing to it to increase its AE, it is more accurate than how it was with Icarus Grip prior to the AE system being introduced. The difference is that it has slightly less aim assist than it did prior. The old system, your aim assist was always cut in half when you were in the air. Your cone would be more inaccurate, but you still had aim assist to help. Destiny has generous aim assist, so even cutting it in half was a lot of aim assist. Then putting on an Icarus Grip would decrease the cone size. Now with the AE system, when you're at 60 AE, your cone size does not increase at all while in the air, but you have that 75% less aim assist versus 50% previously. And the aim assist number goes up with your AE stat. Now he explains even at 0 AE, the cone size does not expand as much as it did prior to the system. The current system at 100 AE is better than a weapon with Icarus Grip and Heat Rises in the old system. Now let me just say this, I completely understand where Merc is coming from, but cone growth is not really something I'm concerned about while I'm in the air. Unless I'm like actually eating my grenade, proccing Heat Rises, or using things like wings to suspend me. For the most part, I jump in the air to land that crit on somebody that's sitting there behind a barricade, or to land that shot on someone that's jumping up from one elevation to another. Cone growth is not really an issue for me because the follow-up shot is going to be me with my feet on the ground. But yes, 75% less aim assist, that's noticeable. Absolutely. We'll see how things play out, especially with the AE mods that we can apply to our helmets. I know it's been a pain point for PvP players. At this point, I've pretty much gotten used to it, and I do understand the logic around it. And again, like I said, I've kind of just gotten used to the system that we currently have in the game. Let me see how things play out with the helmet mods, and we'll go from there. Next question. Any more plans for heavy burst hand cannons, especially for mouse and keyboard players? Warden's Law does not feel good as it does on controller. Any new models coming? Mark goes on to say that they're messing with things which led to mouse and keyboard getting less aim assist with Wardens. In the final shape, they are buffing stability on the heavy burst archetype in general, as well as an intrinsic bonus to the frame, which reduces incoming flinch by a small amount. But yes, we are getting 2 new heavy burst hand cannons coming in the final shape. I love that they're adding weapons to this archetype. It may not be my favorite, but I love it in PvE, especially with Lucky Pants. You give me a Strand heavy burst hand cannon? Oh! Now the next question. If you were given the green light to make an entirely new weapon or weapon type, for example, dual wielding, what would you make, Merc? And what design obstacle would need to be overcome to get it off the ground? Merc goes on to say that he feels that there is a space for a different type of melee weapon besides swords or glaives, and he's dying for a Halo 3 Mauler. Boy, that takes me back, right? The Mauler melee combo was nasty. Now he goes on to say that a lot of things are tied into making weapons and not solely on just his team. You need to think about how it would be balanced. What would a handheld shotgun be? Would it be a primary weapon or a special? He goes on to say it would probably be a primary, as if it was just a special, it would just be like a rapid fire shotgun. If it was a one-hit kill, it'd be too strong. So it would need to be a 2-hit kill. And if it's a 2-hit kill, how fast does it shoot? But he goes on to say that they do make a design, they use it in playtests without any gun models. And that's essentially what he did with Final Warning. And he actually got the idea from Mandalorian and his wrist rockets, with the design intention of making it easy to use like Yoden, but actually give it a high skill ceiling. Now the next question, with the adjustment to hand cannon flinch, is there any discussion of reducing or removing primary versus primary flinch in gunfights? Merc goes on to state that they've been discussing it, not removing flinch entirely, but reducing it. They've taken one step by reducing hand cannon flinch coming in March, and the team's actually got new tools, which they hope will allow them to tune sniper and linear fusion rifle flinch better. This would hopefully help with snipers shooting through what seems like ridiculous amounts of flinch. Next question, have you ever thought about reducing the potency of opening shots on special weapons, specifically shotguns and snipers, as they feel mandatory? Merc says not only have they thought about it, they've already done it. Opening shot gets 50% of the benefits on special weapons, but goes on to say that maybe it's still too strong, and that perhaps they may hit it again, but it wouldn't be a lot. Says the bigger bigger problem is that there really isn't any other perk competition in those perk slots. The answer is twofold, where they may need to nerf it a bit, but they also need to build a perk that competes with it. Fallout says it would need to be hella good to compete. Merc asks what they value. And essentially what things boiled down to in this conversation was that we could be getting a perk that not only gives us range, but also quick draw. Now, he did mention they could give like half the range benefits of opening shots, but let me just ask you, would you take a perk like that? Something that gave you a lot of handling, but half the range. Personally, I would, in a heartbeat. I think the only people that wouldn't are my Ophidian aspect users. The rest of us, hell yeah. Now, Merc continues by saying that they tried it with Barrel Constrictor, and the buff that's coming to it next week, he states that it's cracked now. But of course, it's locked behind a kill trigger, and that it's way better than opening shots and lasts longer. But again, you have to get a kill first. Number-wise though, guys, it reduces pellet spread by 25% when getting a kill. So think like OG shot package. Now, next question. Can we get more party type game modes? Merc goes on to say that yes, we can see more party modes, but this doesn't mean we're going to see less core modes. He says that Collision is coming next week in Crucible Labs, the King of the Hill, and Hardpoint mode. They're also going to be experimenting on different fun takes with the Destiny sandbox. He mentioned hardware, the mode with no abilities, and mode players have asked for a long time. Now, he says they want these different modifiers to exist in private matches, so players can test things for themselves, but that the checkmate modifiers, such as the time to kill changes, and the different special ammo options, will be available in private matches in the final shape. Now, the next question. If hardware is a success, could this be a core mode with perhaps movement abilities available? Now, he says it won't be a core mode like Control, but they could cycle it in. The only abilities would be jumps, no Icarus dash, shield bash, etc. Now, next question. What direction is the PvP strike team pulling towards in terms of overall balance and how the Crucible should feel? Mark says it's pretty much what they said in the tweet. They want it to be rewarding to the people that play it and provide a variety of experiences. And they want to dedicate it to PvP players, not just high skill, but also the people that just love goofy game modes. Essentially, they want it to be a fun place for players that like PvP. Some of it is rewarding skill, and some of it is providing more rewards and incentive to play. Are there any plans for a big team battle mode in PvP? We talked about this last week after we played Sparrow Control. If anything, it made myself miss combined arms. Mark says that they're investigating it, but it goes on to say that there's some weird tech stuff that happens when a lot of players load into an activity, such as some of the glitches during the 12-man raids that we had back in the day. And they're investigating a way to have it and still be stable. But I love that they're considering it, and I want them to consider going big. I'm talking 12v12, huge maps, make it insane. Now, will the upcoming maps vary in size? Will they have their own playlists? Or will they be weighted separately from the rest of the current map pool? Mark says he can't answer the second part, but they built them to focus on 3v3. And he mentioned the roughly Javelin 4 size. Now, he goes on to say that there are a variety of sidelines, so this doesn't mean they're all going to be SMG maps. And that he's been working on the geometry of the maps to make sure there's a bunch of different engagement differences. Now, why are there so many nodes and matchmaking parameters in PvP? Mark says there isn't a one-size-fit-all strategy to make PvP fun for everyone. He says they've been experimenting a lot with the playlists and matchmaking the last year, taking out stuff, they've brought new stuff in, they've combined playlists, they've changed matchmaking. They found things like merging Control and Clash was not good. Then they got rid of Rumble and they thought people would play Control, but they just stopped playing it, so they brought it back. Long-term goal is not have as much overlap in the playlists, so there's always a specific place for a different type of player. And the same with matchmaking. Some don't like skill-based matchmaking, some don't like connection-based matchmaking, so they offer options as if every playlist is the same. Some players are not going to want to play. Now, what are the factors that go into deciding a player's skill bracket? Mark says pretty much everything on the scorecard. Kills, deaths, assists, hell, even objectives and revives. It's all combined at the end of the game behind the scenes to show where you stand among the 6 or 12 players. Skill bracket is bundled by playlists, meaning competitive does not affect social playlists and vice versa. Now, Kami asks, is there any non-visible factors? Mark says he doesn't believe so, but doesn't know for sure. He states that he believes they're all visible factors, but in the past, there were non-visible ones, but that was years ago. Now, why are they doubling down on Fireteam-based matchmaking when data shows that trios have significantly lower player counts? Now, Mark says that they believe they explained it well in the tweet. He's aware that trio player count is lower, which is why they're making it exclusively more rewarding, and also made the trials passage changes to help you play with more friends of different skill levels. Now, while the data shows trios population has decreased, they still have the highest flawless percentages compared to solos and duos, and in addition to other metrics, are much healthier for trials right now by having duo and solo queues. Now, Merc says that they're experiencing less skill creep over the course of a season, less player drop off in trials over a season, and a lot of that is because solo and duo exists. And I do agree, guys. I love actually playing solo trials. Is it hit or miss with your blueberries? Yeah, that's kind of the fun of it. Now, if they were to remove Fireteam-based matchmaking, short term, it would be an improvement to trios, but long term, it would likely harm everyone's experience and cause the mode to deteriorate. They know this because they've done this. They understand the experience isn't great right now, and they're working to resolve this, but removing fire-based matchmaking is not the solution. Now, this next question was a viewer question. In competitive, one of the viewers said that they ran into an Ascendant player with a KD under 1.0. How can someone with a low KD be that high of a rank? Merc says they used to have anti-carry built into ranked, which would give you less points to be able to rank up. Players thought it was unfair, so it was removed. Now, if you win enough, you will rank up. So essentially, guys, you can be carried in competitive. Merc says just because a player has a low KD doesn't mean they're a bad player though. A 0.9 Ascendant is going to be better than a 1.5 Silver, as they're facing different tiers of skill and enemies. Also, things like objectives helps you win and helps you rank up. KD isn't a good example in competitive, and I will say that is so true. There are many times at the end of a competitive match, everyone is sitting like at a 1.0, maybe even a 0.9 or 0.8, and that's normally when you have really high skilled players going against each other. Now, Merc did say that players don't like objectives in Destiny, but that it's good, and that they're going to continue to keep it in the game. Now, next question. Drewski asks for more details on the collision mode. Merc says that it's like hard points in Call of Duty. The map will have 5 possible points, and the point is bigger than normal control zone. So a bubble cannot cover the full point, which is kind of hilarious. Consider somebody can literally just sit on a cap point with you and wait for you to peek out of the bubble. Now, you gain points for how long you hold the points, and the point then moves around. Only one team can hold the point at a time though, meaning if you're down 99-0, if you prevent the other team from holding the point, you can make that comeback. Now, this game mode will have special ammo crates. There will be no mercy rule in this mode, as the intent is that it is possible to come back no matter what. Now, this was one of the most asked questions in the chat. Will Hawkmoon ever be craftable? Merc says, quote, I don't know, man. Maybe one day. Lol. Next question. Drewski asks if Collision was designed with special ammo crates in mind. Merc says yes. Hardware as well was also designed with special ammo crate in mind, but it can always be changed to the special ammo meter if people don't like that. But they place the crates in specific locations close to the objective points. Merc likes the crates in modes like Clash, but they're going to be taking feedback on the crates and the bar and figure out which of these systems is best. Now, Drewski has a question about Gutshot Straight and how it's going to be performing in the new sandbox, especially with body shots doing less damage. Now, Merc says he's tried it and it actually counteracts the body shot penalties. He also brought up the buff that it had received, making it easier to use, and doesn't think it's bad anymore. Personally, guys, I'm not crazy about Gutshot Straight. I'm okay with Enhanced though, as it doesn't hurt your target acquisition as much, but I don't think anyone likes a perk that messes with your aim, right? Now, the final question, this one from Drewski. Will we ever get box breathing on a 180 round per minute hand cannon? Merc says he gave them precision instruments on a 180, which is similar, but he's not sure if it can 3-tap anymore. Not in the new sandbox. Again, more stuff we're gonna have to do testing on. The weapon he's bringing up is Word of Crota though. Well, guys, that is everything from that podcast. I know this was a very long video. If you stuck it out this long, thank you so much. And again, go show these gentlemen love. I love when they do live streams like this because we get a sneak peek of what's happening with Bungie behind the scenes, especially on the sandbox front. So big shout out to that squad and of course Merc himself for giving us this information. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.